For the last 80 years, global stability has been anchored by a single unipolar power. The United States military and its massive economic reach have effectively served as the world's ultimate policing force, holding international order in a careful balance. Yet for those who study biblical eschatology, this era of American dominance presents a glaring anomaly. If you look closely at the text describing the final years of human history, a superpower resembling the United States is missing from the geopolitical map. We are watching that ancient omission become a modern reality. Internal polarization, fractured politics, and institutional fragility are eroding the capacity of the West to project power or maintain international cohesion. This political friction is compounded by a deteriorating economic baseline. With global debt surpassing $300 trillion and central banks relying on aggressive currency debasement to stay afloat, the financial leverage that historically sustained the West is breaking down. The geopolitical restrainer that kept rival nations at bay is fracturing. As American influence recedes, it leaves behind a massive, volatile power vacuum on the world stage. Nature abhors a vacuum, and international politics is no different. Emerging regional powers are rapidly mobilizing to replace the old unipolar system with a fractured multipolar landscape. The primary mechanism driving this fracture is economic. Nations within the BRICS alliance, specifically Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are pursuing de-dollarization to bypass Western financial networks. By establishing alternative payment systems and trading in local currencies, these nations are dismantling the economic leverage the West has relied on for decades to enforce sanctions and dictate international behavior. This movement toward an alternative financial system removes the primary diplomatic lever of the West. Without the threat of dollar-based sanctions, regional powers gain the freedom to bypass old alliances and form the specific military-focused blocks required for the next phase of the conflict. As this map of the Middle East illustrates, the prophet Ezekiel detailed a massive invasion force, known as the Magog Coalition, that would one day descend upon Israel from the remote parts of the far north. Modern eschatological analysis identifies the Russian Federation as the northern hegemon stepping into this role. Joining this northern power are the prophesied secondary actors. The biblical text points directly to Persia, modern-day Iran, acting alongside a strategic alignment with Turkey. The causal mechanism behind this alliance is an unintended consequence of Western policy. By imposing heavy sanctions to isolate Russia from Western markets, policymakers forced Moscow into a strategic military and logistical pivot toward Tehran. This partnership matured on the battlefields of the Syrian civil war. For the first time in history, Russian and Iranian troops integrated their command structures and began operating just miles from Israel's northern border in the Golan Heights. Ezekiel notes that this coalition is drawn southward in search of spoil. Historically debated, this target is now taking shape in the massive Leviathan and Tamar natural gas reserves discovered in the Mediterranean, fields that directly compete with Russian energy dominance. Secular energy disputes and political isolation have placed Russian, Iranian, and Turkish interests on the same battlefield, positioning these forces in the geographic configuration described in the ancient text. While nations maneuver for position, the planet itself is exhibiting intense volatility. The Olivet Discourse in the book of Matthew describes these environmental escalations as birth pains, a series of systemic shocks designed to increase in frequency and intensity. The escalation in seismic events across the Mediterranean and broader geological instability align with this prophetic framework. Crucially, these environmental shocks serve a political function. The narrative of a permanent polycrisis provides the pretext for secular organizations to implement sweet restructuring, often branded as a Great Reset. Under the pressure of global disaster, sovereign nations become more willing to surrender authority to international experts. Supranational bodies use these crises to expand their mandates, dictating resource management and health policies across borders. The distress of the physical earth acts as both a divine warning and a secular tool. It accelerates the construction of the bureaucratic infrastructure required for a centralized global system. Yet while global power centralizes and military alliances form, the true prophetic clock is governed by a single contested footprint of land in the Levant. The logistics required to restore the ancient Jewish sacrificial system, most notably the procurement and maturation of flawless red heifers in Israel, have moved from the fringes of religious curiosity into the mainstream, creating an active geopolitical trigger. This theological ambition is already driving military conflict. The active preparation for Third Temple infrastructure was cited by Palestinian militant groups as a primary justification for the violence initiated in late 2023. When the global economy fractures, northern military ties solidify, and Temple Mount tensions align, the probability of coincidence begins to collapse. These aren't isolated regional shifts. They are a synchronized movement toward a singular point. The danger of this moment is how it resolves. The end times may not begin with total nuclear destruction, but rather through a carefully negotiated, deceptive peace. The biblical text points to a covenant with many, a comprehensive treaty brokered by a central authoritarian figure that resolves the Middle East conflict and finally grants permission to construct the Third Temple. The architectural and psychological groundwork for this unified system of belief is being laid. Ecumenical projects seeking to blend the world's major faiths under a banner of tolerance are building the infrastructure for a synchronized global religion. As the Apostle Paul warned, it is precisely when the world declares peace and safety that sudden destruction follows. This diplomatic triumph will serve to pull the trigger on the greatest conflict in human history. The multidimensional crisis we face today is the final warning bell. The structures of the old world are dissolving, and we are standing directly in the doorway of the final act of human history.